Hey everyone, it's Brandy and welcome back to my channel, Brandy Janae's Bookshelf. Today I'm going to be going over all of the books that I finished in February. So honestly, this video is probably not even going to be that long in terms of a wrap up because I think I talked about the majority of the books that I'm going to be mentioning in this video in my February mid-month wrap up. Before I get into the actual wrap up, I did want to just talk about one or two things about my reading for the month. So if you've been following along with me, you know, typically I read kind of a large amount of books in a month, depending on my mood, because I know sometimes I just am not in the mood to read. I know I get in moods like that. February was one of those months. I think I kind of overdid it in both December and January, and that led to me not wanting to pick things up as much. And then I was also super overwhelmed because somehow over the course of a couple months I started getting a lot of e-arcs or digital arcs, and I was trying to make sure I stayed up with those along with reading books that I wanted to read, and it was just not really working out for me. I didn't find a good balance. February I was trying to play catch up by reading the arcs that I didn't get to in January that came out, also read the ones that were coming out in February, and then in the back of my mind I was like, I really also want to catch up and get ahead and read the ones that are coming out in March, so that, you know, when this came out, because especially because I had video ideas where I wanted to post videos either at the beginning of the month talking about all of the arcs that I had that were coming out, or I wanted to post on the week that they were coming out, talk about the ones that were coming out that week. And that was my plan, and of course to do that I needed to have everything read ahead of time, but I just didn't have enough time. A lot of it hit in February and I just got super overwhelmed, and I ended up like just rereading a lot of books from things that I wanted to. And then I was also helping host the Black Author Readathon. I was trying to get reading done for that, and then I was also feeling really discouraged because of all the other things. It was just a lot going on, and I felt like that really hindered my reading, or I don't want to say it hindered my reading, but it reflected a lot in what I actually picked up. Because out of all the books that I had on my TBR, I don't think I got through the majority of those. A lot of what I read was rereads of stuff that wasn't even on my list at all. I don't know, I just felt like talking about that, just so if you're ever feeling that way, don't feel discouraged. That's why I say that I'm a mood reader, because if I had really forced myself to read the things that I know I needed to get done, I probably wouldn't have ended up reading anything, because I would have just been like, I don't want to do that right now, and it's stressing me out. So with all that being said, let's move into my full wrap up of the month, and I will be starting with the stats that I do keep track of. So in February, I read a total of 13 books, and over those 13 books, I read 5,472 pages, and for the month I had an average rating of 3.63 stars, and this is only counting the new reads that I had. For the month, I didn't have any DNFs. I probably should have had one, but I pushed through it. I had 5 books that I reread. 2 of them were print books, 6 were ebooks, and then 5 were straight audiobooks. So as I always do with my end of the month wrap ups, I will be going through my rereads first and then going through the books in a rating order. Starting off with my rereads, I have 2 series that I'm going to talk about, and actually both of them are by the same author. The first series that I reread, and really this was finishing up a reread, and that was the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. So I have already talked about this in my mid-month wrap up, as well as January mid-month and the final wrap up for January, because I did start the series, my review of the series in January. So I'm not going to do too much talking about this in this video, but if you don't know anything about the series, it starts off following this assassin named Selena Sardouthian. She was a really well-known assassin, but because of some circumstances that happened before the start of this book, she ends up getting captured and is sent to Endovir, which is a slave camp that is set in a salt mine. And she has been there for the past year when the Prince of Ardenland, as well as his guard or captain of the royal guard, comes in and gives her the opportunity to compete to become the king's champion. And if she wins, then she has to work for the king for a certain amount of years, and then she gains her freedom. So of course she decides that she wants to compete in this competition in order to have this opportunity. And from there the story kind of just blossoms and turns into this whole big thing that you're not expecting really from just the beginning of the story. Like I mentioned, I did start my reread of the series in January. I actually read, I think, the first 3 books. So almost half of the series, and then I actually started the 4th book in January as well, but I didn't quite finish it. So in February I finished Queen of Shadows, which is book 4, then Empire of Storms, which is book 5, Tower of Dawn, which is book 6, which I was actually, I think, part of the way through when I filmed my mid-month wrap-up, so I didn't mention this one and the final one in that video. And then finally I read Kingdom of Ash, which of course is the final book in the series. For the most part, I had the same general opinion of all of these books when I read them again. I read all 4 of those. I enjoyed them. I'll probably reread them again sometime in the future because I do really enjoy the series overall. And then the only other reread that I had for the month was A Quarter Frosted Starlight, like I mentioned, also by Sarah J Maas. And this is the novella in her Court of Thorns and Roses series that takes place after the main trilogy. So the first of the books that I read for the first time that I'm going to be talking about is What Big Teeth by Rose Zabo, and I gave this one 2 stars. So this one is following this character named Eleanor Zarin. At the beginning of the story, she has actually run away from the boarding school that she was attending because of something that happened, and she's going back to live with the family that is all living in the town that she's from. She doesn't receive the warm welcome that she's expecting from the family that is at home, and she's just trying to fit in the best that she can. But then something happens to her grandmother, and Eleanor is left with trying to figure out how to make sure that her family stays in control, which leads into a lot of other things. I'm gonna be completely honest, and I kind of remember what this is about, but I really kind of just threw everything out after I talked about it in my mid-month wrap-up because as you might know from the 2-star rating that I gave, I just really was not a fan of this one. So I will just refer you back to that video because I think I did go into a few explanations as to why I felt the way I did about this one. That was the only 2-star book that I had. I'm going to move now into my 3-star section. And the first one of those that I'm going to be talking about is Kerma by Johnny Christmas, which is another book that I have already talked about in my mid-month wrap-up. So this one is a comic following this character named Esme, and we start off when she's a child and she has a really hard time sleeping, and at a very young age she gets into coffee. She finds out that when she drinks too much coffee that she can see ghosts, and then we fast forward to her as an adult. She's working in this cafe. She ends up going into the basement for some reason, and she ends up running into this ghost, and he asks her to take this letter to Brazil and deliver it to his long lost love so that they can be reunited. And the story kind of takes off from there. This is another one that I have already talked about in my mid-month wrap-up. Like I said, go check out that video for thoughts on this one, but know that I did give this one 3 stars. The next one that I have to talk about is Harem Marriage Volume 1 by Nan. This one follows this girl named Koharu, and at the beginning of the story she finds out that she's actually the other woman. Her boyfriend is married, and she's really hurt by the situation. She reveals that this is actually the 3rd time that this has happened to her. So she makes the rash decision to pack up her things and decides to go back to her hometown. And when she gets there, she finds out that her father is actually in the hospital, and that their coffee shop or their cafe, whatever you want to call it, is just not doing as well as it used to. Throughout this process, she finds out that her town has actually made polygamy legal, and she ends up getting approached by this guy from her childhood who she does not remember at all, and he offers to make her his third wife in order for a monetary exchange. Yeah, that's pretty much the basis for this, what I got out of this first volume. Like I mentioned, another one that I have already talked about in my mid-month wrap-up. Now moving into my 4-star section, the next one that I have to talk about is The Red Scott by Twyla Turner. This is a dual perspective story following Peyton and Brayden. At the beginning, in the prologue of the story, we actually are following her in her freshman year of college. She is tutoring this football player, I believe, and it is the final day that she is going to be tutoring him before the end of their winter or fall semester. And long story short, he ends up attempting to rape her in that prologue. She ends up getting away from the guy, and that's when she ends up meeting her 3 best friends. And after the prologue, we fast forward, I believe, 10 years. They're all living in the same city. They're having a talk one day, and they make the decision to like actively try to date someone because they have all been pretty stagnant in their dating lives, except for one of the friends. She was married, but she got divorced and she's kind of just living freely at this point. So the 3 other friends make the decision that they're going to actually try to start dating, and Peyton is the one that is like the most hesitant about the whole situation because she has had this aversion to men since this whole thing happened. And we are following her one day, and she's at work, and she hears 2 of her male co-workers talking about women's bodies and how they look and how they prefer a woman with a nice body. And she gets really upset. She ends up telling them off, but in the back of her mind, she's thinking about this, and she decides that she's going to try to start working out to be more desirable to men. When she makes the decision, she asks her co-worker, who she knows works out consistently, what gym she goes to and everything like that. And this coworker ends up taking her to her gym, and that's where we get the introduction of Brayden. So Brayden is an MMA fighter, and he actually owns and runs the gym that Peyton ends up going to. As soon as he sees her, he is immediately enamored with her, and he trying to figure out, the best way to approach her. Obviously, he doesn't know how she feels about men, especially super like muscular looking men, because of what happened to her. Eventually, her friends end up joining the gym with her once they find out that she has signed up. Her friends kind of end up pushing them together until like clicks and something starts happening. But that's pretty much a general synopsis of this book. I'm not going to get into my thoughts of this one again. Just know that I did really enjoy it. I gave this one 4 stars, and it makes me want to read more from this author. And then the final book that I have that I talked about during the first half of the month was Slay by Brittany Morris. This one is following 17-year-old Kiara Johnson, who on one hand is like the typical ordinary high school girl, or as ordinary as she can be as one of the only Black kids at the high school that she attends. But on the other hand, she has also created this huge virtual reality game. But one day there is this news story about this teenager in Kansas City who was killed over a dispute in the game. And now her game is receiving a lot of backlash, and she's worried about the consequences that may come her way because of this game. She's struggling with that, along with still trying to be proud of who she is and what she has created. Like I mentioned, this is another book, the last book that I believe I talked about in my mid-month wrap-up. So go there to check out thoughts on this. Just know, gave this one 4 stars. I thought it was really good as well. So the next book that I have to talk about is The Electric Kingdom by David Arnold. So this story is taking place in a post-apocalyptic New England, and this fly flu has swept over the world and left few survivors. So we have couple different characters that we're following. On one hand, we have 18-year-old Nico, who is setting off on this mission that her father gave her. And then we're also following this little boy named Kit, who I believe is 12 years old. And we kind of flip-flop back and forth between them. And then there's also this third character, only known as the Deliverer. This is one of the hardest books to dive into, because it's one of those things that like you don't know what's going on until you kind of read it. I know this sounds really weird and really vague, and you're like, obviously you don't know what's going on until you read it, but it's one of those things that's like constantly having you thinking, and it's one of those things where you don't know the purpose behind the story until you get to the end. And even like thinking about it, I had let it sit like I think a week before I tried to give thoughts on it, because I was just like, I enjoyed it, but what the heck happened? I feel like this is one of those books people are gonna either like or not. I don't know. I can't give you a good explanation of what's going on, how I really felt. It's one of those books that I feel like I can reread multiple times and always, you know, get more out of it, because there's just constantly things that you don't think about until you know the full story, to kind of pick apart the little things that were dropped that you don't think about when it's actually happening. Just know, I'm glad that I got this. Like I mentioned before, I think I mentioned before when I first talked about this seemed like a story that I was gonna like. It actually didn't turn out to be what I thought it was gonna be, but I still ended up enjoying it. If you're looking for a book that will make you think, I think this is a good one to check out. Anyway, I gave this one 4 stars. I still don't know how to like truly feel about it, but I think, like I mentioned, I enjoyed it. I want to reread this in the future. I just need to let it sit for a little bit for now. Okay, and the last 4-star read that I have to talk about today is Shadow Blade by Ceresia Glass. This is an urban fantasy story that is following Kira Solomon. So when she was younger, she was actually dropped off at what is called the Gilead, I believe, by her foster parents, because she accidentally puts her sister in a coma because of her magical abilities, and her foster parents are really distraught by this, so they kind of just drop her off like, we can't handle this anymore, you need to take her. And because of that, Kira ends up being trained as a shadow chaser, which is basically someone who fights evil characters, people that are influenced, or creatures that are influenced by the shadows. That's the easiest way to say that. After that prologue of her as a child, and we fast forward to her as an adult, and by day she actually works as an antiques expert. One day, this professor, I believe he's a professor that she's friends with, brings in this dagger for her to examine. He tells her that it's this 4,000-year-old Egyptian dagger, and I think he asks her for more information on it. He ends up leaving it with her. She's supposed to be meeting up with him not that much longer after, I think maybe a few days after he drops off this dagger. And on the way there, she actually finds out that he has been murdered, and she figures that it is connected to the dagger that he left with her. During the process of making sure that this dagger doesn't end up in the wrong hands, she ends up meeting this 4,000-year-old Nubian warrior named Kafar, who is actually the rightful owner of the dagger, and he's trying to convince her to give the dagger back to him before this other force that is actually trying to come after it gets its hands on it for reasons that are obviously not good. And they end up having to work together in order to fight the enemy, of course. Isn't that how all stories like this go? Anyway, this one was kind of a double-edged sword. I gave it 4 stars because I did use that call pause system and breaking it down by the different elements. It ended up getting 4 stars. But there were some things that kept me from enjoying it as much as I would have hoped. So if I had given this a rating just strictly based on my enjoyment, it probably would have got like 3 or 3.5 stars. I felt it hard to follow along sometimes because it was a lot of, here's this character, this was happening, this was happening, this was happening. And it made it hard to connect with the character on an emotional level. I felt like we never really got the opportunity to really have that emotional side of our main character. So I felt like that really hurt the story, at least as far as me, because she had been alone for so much of her life. She couldn't touch anybody, and she had these 2 major deaths in her life. But besides that, she didn't have any strong, like super strong connection. She had friends, but she never had, I felt like, anything that she absolutely couldn't lose in her life. And that kept the story from being too high stakes. Obviously, we get that a little bit later on, but I think because it kind of happened so suddenly, the romance aspect of it, that I couldn't really I just didn't feel like it was there yet. So I'm hoping that as I continue on with the story that it does get a little better for me. But like I mentioned, putting it in with like the writing, characters, the plot, everything that the call power system breaks down, it ended up getting 4 stars. So I think that's good. I think overall it's a good book. It's a good story. I just wish that it had a little bit more emotional connection to the character so that I could have felt it when things were happening, you know, to her. And then the final book that I have to talk about for this month, which is the only 5-star book that I had for February, was Fans Only by B. Love. And this is a contemporary romance novella following Aries and Merrick. So at the beginning of the story, we're following the two of them. They are with their group of friends, and somehow the discussion of OnlyFans comes up, and all of the friends are talking about whether or not they would, you know, have an OnlyFans account. And Aries ends up mentioning how she wouldn't mind doing it. You know, people are making their money, do what they need to do, and how no one would know it was her unless she actually said anything. So after this meeting with this group of friends, Merrick, who is obviously also there, like I mentioned, he ends up approaching her and ends up asking her if she wants to work with him. Like, they both create an OnlyFans account together in order to accomplish their separate goals. So Aries is trying to sign up for this fashion design internship. In order to do this, she would have to move to California, and she needs a certain amount of money to pay for whatever she needs to pay for in order to do that. Merrick, on the other hand, wants to build his own music studio so that he has the ability to make money by renting out studio space and use that in order to support him while he's recording and producing his own music. So they both come together and agree that they're going to make this account together. They come up with like a specific idea for the account, and then they give themselves 6 months in order to play out the story that they're trying to play out. And, you know, at the end of that, they would go their own separate ways. They would just remain friends, no actual romantic feelings for each other. I give this one 5 stars. Like I mentioned, I thought it was really well done. I really appreciated how, despite how their relationship worked as far as friends, Merrick always made sure that Aries was comfortable whenever they were together to do, you know, their filming and stuff for their OnlyFans account. And I appreciated how much they supported each other no matter what. I think one really big thing that I loved about this story is that there was talk of love languages. I don't remember how it gets started, but they both talk about their specific love language. I think Aries is physical touch, and then Merrick's is words, and then they both, you know, give the other their love language. So Aries is always talking to him and like uplifting and telling him, you know, appreciating the things that he's doing for her, because he actually ends up doing a lot that he doesn't need to do. And, you know, Merrick is giving her the touch that she likes. So I appreciated that, you know, they found out these things about each other and they actually showed it and did what the other liked the most. And it just made their relationship seem more believable when it actually did come together, you know, when feelings were developed, because it wasn't only about the sex. It was about them and, you know, them realizing what the other wanted and wanting to be the person that's giving those affections to the other ones. I just thought it was really well done, and for a 100-page novella, it just seems like it was a full story. Those are all the books that I read during February. I figured this was something that I would start doing because it's a good look at, I guess, what I'm currently reading, because I feel like I don't really do a currently reading. And I'm trying to get back into it, but I haven't really been updated on Rereads like I used to. Normally at the end of my day, every day, I would, you know, go on and update all of my pages and stuff like that and finish off books finished and stuff like that. But I haven't been